Okay. Just got back from shul.
Oh, okay. So we're going
Okay.
to change the time, maybe
Yeah, I think we have to soon.
8:45,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. So the Mishnah, the today's daf is Masechta Bava Metzia daf Ayin Hey, and we are beginning on daf Ayin Hey Amud Aleph by the Mishnah. So here begins the Mishnah, and this is the last daf in Masech in Ezehu Neshach, the fifth parak of Ezehu Neshach, Ribbis. So the Mishnah says like this: Lo yoyma adam lechavera. A person should not tell his friend, halveini kur chitim. Lend me 30 saw of chitim. That's a huge amount. All right, like 2 tons of chitim of wheat. Vani etin lecha lagoyrin. I'm going to give it to you back later on when I harvest my field. So the what's wrong with that? You're borrowing 2 tons, a core of chitin, and you're returning a core of chitin. So the reason is that's called a saw besaw. You're returning, you're borrowing a certain amount of wheat, and you're returning a certain amount of wheat. What could be wrong with that? Why would that be ribis? So you guessed it, because of the inflation. Maybe when you borrow it, the core of chitin was worth $1,000, and then when you return it, let's say a few months later, during the threshing period, a core of chitin, it goes up in value, and it goes to $1,200. So if you're going to return that same kur of chitim, you're actually giving ribis. So therefore, you should not do that. Aval, but there's an exception. If you have in storage a kur of chitin, right? You have in storage a kur of chitin, so you can say, lend me a kur of chitin, and my son is going to bring me a core of chitim, or he's going to give me the access to the core of chitim that I have. So therefore, that's the exception, because we consider it as if the lender has he's very secured, because you already say that I have a core of chitin, I'm not accessing it right now, and therefore it's if it goes up in value, that core of chit have in storage is reserved for you. So if it goes up in value, it's your core it's your core that went up in value, and therefore it's not considered ribis. Okay, so I'm not returning it. It's almost, because this whole thing is anyway Rabbanan. So the rabbis gave an exception that if you have it in your possession that you could at any moment pay back, then you can borrow a core of chitin in the exchange of another core of chitin. So that's what it says. You can say, Halveni, lend me the kur of chitin, until my son comes and brings me a kur of chitin. He's right there, he's carrying a kur of chitin that belongs to me. Until I find the key to my storage house. So lend me a kur of chitin. So again, it's considered ribis, and the rabbi, it's okay. The Hillel Oyser, Hillel said this is prohibited. Hillel was very strict when it came to ribis. And Hillel was even more strict. Normally, if you borrow, like talva isha kika lechaveta, a woman should not lend her friend a loaf of bread, a loaf of rye bread, until you evaluate how much the bread is worth. And then when a borrower wants to return, she should return the exact amount of bread, the exact amount of value of bread. Because if you lend her a loaf of rye bread, and when she comes to return it, the price of rye bread went up, it's ribis. So Hillel was very strict on that situation, and tells the psak that don't lend your friend a kikar, a loaf of bread, until you know exactly how much it's worth. Shem yukrichitim, maybe wheat will become more expensive. Benim seboyis l'dei ribis, and that leads to interest. The Chachamim disagree. The Chachamim hold that's not a problem. Women, neighbors don't mind. You lend me a dozen eggs, I don't care if you return a dozen eggs a week or two later. That's fine, even though the price of eggs have gone up. We don't paskin like that. Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna said, we learned in the Mishnah that if you have in your possession the kur chitim, then you're allowed to borrow a kur of chitim. So Rav Huna says exactly, yesh loy saw, if you have a saw of chitim, loy v'saw, you can borrow a saw of chitim. So sayim, if you have 2 saw of chitim, loy v'sayim, you can borrow 2 saw of chitim, but never more than what you have. Okay, because again, this is avak ribis, and rabbis gave a little leniency that if you have it, you can borrow against it, and we wouldn't consider it ribis, but not more than what you have. Rabbi Yitzchak says no. Afilu yesh loy saw, even if you have a saw. Loiva aleh kamakurin. You're allowed to borrow one after another, even many kurs, which is 30 saw. In other words, if you have one saw, you can borrow against it one saw. And now that you have two saw, you can borrow another transaction, another two saw. And now that you have four, then you can borrow another four. But as long as you keep you based on that first saw that you have, you can increase your borrowing power for kamukurim and not worry about ribis. Again, the Rabbi Yitzchak was much more lenient than Rav Huna. Tana Rav Chia l'siyu Rabbi Yitzchak. Rav Chia taught a brisa that brings a support for Rabbi Yitzchak. If a tipes yain ein loy, if you don't have a drop of wine in your house, or tipes shemen ein loy, if you have no drop of oil in your house, you can't borrow against it. You can't borrow any oil or any wine. Or yesh loy, but if you have a drop of wine, we can infer if you have a drop of oil, loy valeh kamatipin, then you can borrow against it many drops. It doesn't matter. As long as you have one drop to fall back on, you can make the initial loan, and then subsequent loans could follow based on what you now have. The Hillel says this whole thing is no good. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel, halacha k'tivei Hillel. The halacha is like Hillel, but we don't paskin like Hillel. We still begin with this type of avak ribis. So again, you can borrow a kur of chitim versus a kur of chitim, and return a kur of chitim, as long as you have in your storage a kur of chitim as well. Now, what happens? Rav Hillel was even more strict. Hillel said a very interesting thing. Hillel says that two neighbors, one can't lend her neighbor another a loaf of bread. You can't lend your neighbor a loaf of bread because when she returns it, maybe the price of bread went up. Amma Rabbi Huda Amma Shmuel Zu Divrei Hillel. That is the words of Hillel. That's the opinion of Hillel. You can't lend a neighbor can't lend her neighbor bread. Ava Chacham, and the Chacham says loivin stam upayrin stam. You can lend and you can pay back. You don't have to write down. Oh, the price of bread that I gave you was $4.49 a pound, and now you owe me $4.49. No, you don't. You could borrow and pay back again because this whole thing is anyway ribis rabbanim, and Chachamim didn't make that strictness to call it ribis rabbanim when neighbors who generally borrow and lend to each other. You don't have to be so particular. The Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, B'nei Chabura Hamakpidin Zalzeh. You have a group of guys who are very pedantic with each other, very careful, writing everything down. You took this, I take that. One for one, measure for measure. So then it's not good to be that way because that's not really a friendship. Oivrim Mishim, they could sometimes transgress when they're dealing with each other on Shabbos, Mishum Mida, measuring something on Shabbos, Mishum Mishkal, weighing something on Shabbos, Mishum Minyan for counting. In other words, if two people, if a group of people are so makbid on each other, so let's say one guy says, oh, I'm going to lend you 10 walnuts on Shabbos, and the other guy is going to pay him back 10 walnuts. You're causing counting to be done on Shabbos. You're causing weighing to be done on Shabbos. You're causing measuring to be done on Shabbos. So that could lead to that. That's that they can transgress the Isser of Shabbos by doing that. When somebody borrows something from you, you estimate and take it. And but if you're such a group of people that are makbid on one another, then it could lead to Chil Shabbos. And from using the wrong words on Yantiv. Loivin upayrim, they sometimes can use a word of borrowing and paying back. When are you going to paying back? And it could lead to writing. So therefore, if you're such a type of person, it could lead to Chil Shabbos and Chil Yantiv. Even according to Beis Hillel, Ach Mishum Ribis. They're Oiver Mishum Ribis because if they're so careful with each other, maybe somebody made the wrong estimate what one person lent each other, and it could lead to interest, according to Hillel. Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, Talmidei Chachamim mutarim lulvay zeh mizeh beribis. A Talmud Chacham could borrow using ribbis. Wow. A Talmud Chacham, a small amount. A Talmud Chacham, because ribbis is also in the Torah, right? So if one Talmud Chacham borrows from another Talmud Chacham, the other Talmud Chacham should pay more. My Tama, what should be the reason for that? Answers the Gemara, May de Yodi, everybody knows the ribbis asura. Everybody knows ribbis is prohibited. Umatano hu de yahav hadadi. They're just giving a gift. So in other words, if one Talmud Chacham borrows $100 from the other Talmud Chacham, he's allowed to return 105. Why? He'll say that the 100 is the return of the loan and $5 is a gift. And everybody knows, Talmud Chacham knows of ribbis, so he can that the $5 would be an extra gift, and that is okay only amongst Talmidei Chachamim. Again, you have to know the halacha how you would paskin bisman hazeh. Gemara gives a story. Amar Shmuel la Avua bar Ihi. Shmuel said to Avua bar Ihi, or maybe his neighbor, he said, Halveni mea pilpulin, lend me 100 peppers, the mea, the esrim pilpulin, and I'm going to pay you back 120 peppers. Ba'arech, and this is good, because I know when I'm going to pay you back 120, the 100 is to pay back the loan, and the 20 I'm giving you as a gift, and that's okay. So that's the story of Hillel. That's the Gemara. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Yehuda said in the name of Rav, Muto loy laodam lahalvois banov ubnei baise beribis kilat imam tam beribis. Fascinating thing. A person could lend his children, okay, his household, and he says, you could go over to your son and say, I'm lending you $1,000 with a 15% interest, and that's permitted. Why? Why would somebody do that to his own son? Because he wants his son to feel what it's like to pay ribbis and to pay interest and how hard it is. And therefore, when he's going to grow up, he's not going to lend somebody else with ribbis because he knows he had it so hard trying to pay back his father, trying to catch up on the ribbis that he owed. So a person is allowed to do that. And that's a training of chinuch. Says the Gemara, that's not such a good training, and the Gemara refutes that. V'lav milsi, don't try that. Mishum da'asei lemisrach, because you could spoil them, you could soil them. In other words, they could come and say you'll have the opposite effect. They'll see how good ribbis could be for the lender, and they're going to say, I'm going to lend to other people with ribbis. I just saw this, I'm going to lend to other people with ribbis, and that we don't want to be done. And because of that, therefore, we don't. You shouldn't try this lending your own kids with ribbis. Next Mishnah: a man could send to his friend, "Nakish imi va'anakish imcha." You weed my field one day together with me, and I'll help you weed your field another day. Even though it depends on the day. Let's say some days it's light outside 6 hours, 7 hours, and some days it's light outside 8 hours. So the person that's returning the favor, because he got his friend to work on his field first, may work extra hard on working on his friend's field when he needs it. So that's okay. That's okay as long as you're doing the similar work. Nakish, he weeded your field, so you can weed his field. Adar, he shoveled Adar imi, he shoveled your field. You can say, I'm going to now shovel your field when you need it. But you should not say, Nakish ime be'eder imcha. You Nakish ime be'eder imcha. You should not say, weed with me and I will shovel with you. Adar imi, shovel with me, v'anakash imcha, and shovel with you, because maybe the type of work that you're going to perform for your friend, which was different than the work that he performed for you, will be much harder, and therefore it's like you're working harder because he gave you something earlier, he did it earlier. So because he did something earlier for you, and now you're paying him back with harder work. So that's like a ribbis type of thing. Obviously, you're not paying him for the day. So when you're returning him the favor, basically, you're returning him a day's worth of labor versus the day's worth of labor that he gave you. And therefore, if you're going to do a different work than he gave you, you might be working harder than what he worked for you, and that's considered ribbis. You go to Amid Beis. But even if they're doing the same type of work, Kol Yemei Revia Achas. The dry season is considered one, and the wet season, the rainy season, considered one. In other words, if you're doing the same type of work, you have to. If you're doing the same type of work, we said it's okay as long as you're doing it in the same season. But if you're doing it in different season, let's say he's well, the Mishnah is going to give you an example, then you might be working harder for what he did. For example, you can't say charosh imi bagarid, help me plow my field during the dry season. Maybe it's easier to plow a field in the dry season, and I'm going to plow with you in the rainy season. So that, again, that's returning something much more than what he did for you, and that could be considered ribis. Rabbi Gamliel said, "Yesh ribis mukdamesh v'yesh ribis mucheres." Ribis.
What if the person who theoretically would be getting the ribis because it's harder for the other guy or easier for the other guy? What if it was his? What if it was his suggestion?
I guess that you have to not follow through on it. It doesn't matter.
Even if it's his suggestion.
Right.
And because he asked, you might be doing something that would appear as ribis, you can't do it, even though it wasn't you, it was him.
Right, because ribis interest is an avera not only on the lender, but also on the borrower. The borrower cannot give ribis. So you could be a nice person, you want to give interest, that's also an avera. And we're going to learn that very shortly.
Okay.
Rabbi Gamliel Omer, yesh ribis mukdames, yesh ribis mucheres. Sometimes ribis, you can prepay a ribis, and sometimes a ribis could be after the loan, and it will be you're doing an avera. Ketzad. Here's an avera. Nasan Amos Lilvas many. You found a guy that wants to lend you money. You send him something, and you send him a gift. You send him a nice gift card for a restaurant. And he said, and you write in the gift card, because you're lending me the money in the future, I'm giving you this gift card to this restaurant. Zihi rubis mukdamis. That is called prepaid interest, which is asar. But the opposite also is true. Love many, you borrowed from somebody, and you return the money, and he sends you back, and he says, you send him a gift, again, this gift card to a restaurant, and say, because you lent me money, and your money was by me, and you didn't earn interest, I'm sending you this gift card for thanking you for the loan. Zuhi rubis mucharis. That's considered delayed interest, which is not good. You're not allowed to do that. Reb Shimon says, yesh ribis tavarim. Sometimes you can flatter somebody, and that's also usher. Interest is not just generally money, paying money. It could be like a verbal type of interest. For example, you're giving appreciation. There's tulmanish.
Appreciation is not interest.
Yeah, but an appreciation of you're giving him like the Mishnah says, you're giving him a special news that you would not normally give to that person. You shouldn't say to the person that lent you money, you should know, so and so came from a certain place and he sends his regards or something like that. If the lender is not somebody, your friend, and you're now all of a sudden chumming up with him, giving him information that he did not have before, that could be ribis devarim. That's called giving him, showing too much appreciation, which is a problem in Rabbanim. The Elu Ivrim and the following people who are involved in the ribis all get avera. Beloisa say. So the following is people. Hamalva, the lender, of course, gets all the averas. V'halayva, the borrower, gets the avera. V'arev, a guarantor on a loan document that has interest, also gets an avera. V'ha'edim, and witnesses that sign on the document get an avera. The Chachamim says, Af hasoifer, even the scribe that writes up the document gets an avera. Oivrim, they get the following avera. Loisitein, don't give interest. Mishum al tikach mi'itai, don't take from him interest. Mishum loisia loikenoisha, there's a pasuk that says, don't be like a hard money lender, or and that's somebody who's like a pressure. Kenoisha means you're giving pressure onto somebody. There's another pasuk that says, don't give him a bite, which means that don't put interest on the loan. And don't, before a blind person, don't give a stumbling block. So all these psukim, the Gemara finds someone who, especially the lender, gets all these psukim associated. So one interest loan agreement, and you get all these avers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lavin. Tanya, we learned in a brisa. Reb Shimon ben Yochai says, someone who pressures his friend to somebody who lent his friend a mana, $1,000. And he's not the type of the lender is not the borrower is not accustomed to say hello to the lender. He's not allowed to say hello to the person. A very warm hello. If the lender is somebody you don't really associate with, you can't now turn up the charm because he lent you money. How do you know that's asr? Talmud loyman neshach kol davar shishach. Interest is asr on davar. Davar can be words afila dibur asr. Even words can be a possible avera of ribis. Ve'elu oivrim. The following people get an avera of ribis. Malva oiva bekulam. Malva gets every avera. Every lav in the Torah that's listed 5, the malva, the lender, gets all these averas. Loiva, the bar also gets avera. Oiva mishum loisashich lachicha. Loisashich means don't give interest to your brother. And there's another pasuk, lachicha, to your brother loisashich, don't give him interest. Lifnei iva loisitin mechshal, and don't give him a stumbling block to collect the interest. So a loiva, a borrower, despite paying interest, you think, oh, he's doing something good. Just the opposite. He gets 3 averas. Arev, Eidim, the guarantors and the witnesses on the document, Ein Oivrim El Mishum Loisesimen Olav Nechshech. They get the avera of Loisesimen Olav Nechshech. Don't be involved with something that has to do with interest. The Taisus Taught discusses what about Lifnei Iver, but we're going to skip that for now. Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Reb Shimon Oimer, Reb Shimon says, those that lend with interest more than what they're gaining, mafsidim, they're losing out in the end. Because God's going to anyway take away their money somehow. They make a mockery basically of Moshe Rabbeinu's Torah, so to speak. They say, if Moshe Rabbeinu knew how good it is to lend with interest, he would never have written that there's a prohibition against it. So they basically mocking the whole Torah by it's a way of laughing all the way to the bank. Also, Rav Dimi said, how do you know that if you lend somebody money and you know he doesn't have what to pay, you're not allowed to just call him up and say, where's my money? If you know he doesn't have to pay, you can't bother him. Talmud Loimat, the pasuk says, don't be like a lone person that's pressuring somebody. If you know he has no money to pay, then let it go. You're punishing a person who can't pay with 2 punishments. It's like you're punishing the person, making him go through fire and water when he tells you, I don't have the money to pay. And it's like very, very embarrassing when you lend somebody money and you confront him and you know that you have to have a little bit of compassion that if he can't pay you, you have to do it softer or whatever, because it could lead to it's like putting him through fire and water. Amrav Yehuda Marav, Yehuda said in the Meinav, Torah says that if you lend somebody without Eidim, you're causing a stumbling block, because when the lender is going to come collect the money, the borrower is going to deny it. But the truth is, the reason the lender's at fault over here because he lent it without signing a document with Eidim. You're causing people to curse you out because the borrower is going to say that I never borrowed this money, and the truth is the lender did lend the money and the borrower just forgot. Some people say bad things on somebody who's right. The lender is right, but he's wrong by not having it written out in a document, and this caused the borrower to forget that he borrowed the money. And he's going to start making a whole thing that this lender is making up stories about him, that he owes money. Amalei Rabban Ravashi. The rabbis told Ravashi, "Kamakayim Ravina Kol Ma'ada Amar Rabbanim." The Ravina is such astute that he's makayim everything that the rabbis say. Shalach le, so Rav Ashi wanted to test Ravina. Shalach le b'hadi pani de malishapsi, he sent him on Erev Shabbos. Lishde limara asar zuzi disrameli katini de arva mizban. Rav Ashi said sent a message to Ravina, lend me 10 zuz, because I have to buy a piece of land, and it's Erev Shabbos, just send me the money. Shalchalei, so Ravina said, you have to come here, we'll write it down with Adim. So Shalchalei, so Ravashi said, I feel I'm Ravashi. How I'm not going to forget that I borrowed money from you. Shalchalei, so Ravina's answered him, Koshkein for certainly you, the Tarid, because you're so busy learning, you're going to forget that you borrowed the money from me. The Chazal say that you, if you lend somebody money, you have to make sure it's written down. Tan Rabbanan, rabbis taught, 3 people could go to court and they don't get, then they're wrong, because the Eluhain, there's nothing to do. If you lend somebody money without Eidim and you have money, so you did wrong. So you go to court. What's court going to help you? We don't know what that means. If you buy a master for yourself, if your wife bosses you around, that's really your fault. You can't go to court over that. What does it mean? You purchase a master over yourself. If you always say that, oh, this is not my property, it belongs to a guy. And so if you say that enough times about different properties that you have, this guy is going to take you seriously and now have a claim against your land, because the reason why you're probably saying this land belongs to a guy is because you don't want to give an ayin hara, you don't want people to know how wealthy you are. So that's not mine, it belongs to somebody else. Somebody says, if you give all your possessions to your children while they're still alive, that's not a good thing. They have to wait till you pass away before you give something. Not before, you can give some while you're alive, but don't make them richer than you are from your assets. And others say, a person who's stubborn, he sees that he has no good mazel in this city and doesn't go to another city. That's also not so good. That's also kind of Adon Atzma, and a person should have more common sense than that. Okay, we'll stop right over here.